The grocery store was quiet that morning, the kind of quiet that felt heavy, like the air before a storm. Sarah, the store manager, stood behind the counter, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. Her eyes were fixed on Daniel, the young cashier who had been working there for just over a month. He was fumbling with the register again, his hands shaking as he tried to process a customer's payment. The line was growing, and the impatient sighs of the customers were starting to grate on Sarah's nerves. Daniel was a sweet guy, always polite and eager to help, but he just couldn't seem to get the hang of things. He'd been trained multiple times, but mistakes kept happening. Wrong change, missed scans, and now this. Sarah had given him chances, more than she usually would. But enough was enough. "Daniel," she said firmly, stepping closer to him. Her voice was low, but it carried the weight of her frustration. "We need to talk, now." He looked up, his face pale, and nodded. She led him to the small office at the back of the store, the one with the flickering fluorescent light and the faint smell of stale coffee. She closed the door behind them and took a deep breath. "I'm sorry, Daniel," she began, her tone softer now but still resolute. "This just isn't working out. You're a good person, but you're not cut out for this job. I have to let you go." His eyes widened, and for a moment he looked like he might argue, but then his shoulders slumped. He nodded again, his voice barely above a whisper. "I understand." Sarah handed him his final paycheck and watched as he gathered his things from his locker. He didn't say much, just a quiet thank you before he walked out the door. She felt a pang of guilt as she watched him leave, but she pushed it aside. Running a store was about efficiency, not emotions. Little did she know, this was only the beginning. 2 weeks passed, and life at the grocery store settled back into its usual rhythm. Sarah had hired a new cashier, someone with experience who didn't need constant hand-holding. She told herself she'd made the right decision, even if the memory of Daniel's dejected face still lingered in the back of her mind. Then one morning, everything changed. Sarah was in the middle of restocking the cereal aisle when her assistant manager, Lisa, rushed over, her face flushed with excitement. "Sarah, you need to come to the office, now." "What's going on?" Sarah asked, brushing her hands off on her apron. "You'll see," Lisa said, her eyes wide. It's big." Sarah followed her to the office, her curiosity piqued. When she walked in, she froze. Sitting in the chair behind her desk, was Daniel. But this wasn't the same Daniel she'd fired. This Daniel was dressed in a sharp suit, his posture confident, his expression calm but unreadable. He looked up as she entered, and for a moment their eyes locked. Sarah's stomach dropped. "Daniel?" she said, her voice barely above a whisper. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Hello, Sarah. It's been a while." Lisa stepped forward, her voice trembling with nervous excitement. "Sarah, this is Daniel Carter. He's the new owner of the store." Sarah felt like the ground had been ripped out from under her. "What?" Daniel leaned back in the chair, his gaze steady. "I bought the store last week. I thought it was time for a change." Sarah's mind raced. How could this be happening? Daniel, the cashier she'd fired for being unqualified, was now her boss? She felt a mix of emotions, shock, embarrassment, and a growing sense of dread. What did this mean for her? I didn't know," she stammered, struggling to find the right words. "Of course you didn't," Daniel said smoothly. "But don't worry, I'm not here to make things difficult. I just want to make sure the store runs smoothly, better than before." There was something in his tone, a subtle edge that made Sarah's skin prickle. She forced a smile, but her heart was pounding. This wasn't just a coincidence. Daniel had come back for a reason, and she had a sinking feeling she wasn't going to like what came next. The days that followed were tense. Daniel didn't make any drastic changes right away, but his presence loomed over the store like a shadow. He spent hours observing the staff, taking notes and asking questions. Sarah tried to act normal, but every time she saw him, her stomach twisted into knots. One afternoon, Daniel called a staff meeting. Everyone gathered in the break room, their faces a mix of curiosity and nervousness. Sarah stood at the back, her arms crossed, trying to appear calm. Daniel walked in, his demeanor calm and collected. He smiled at the group, but his eyes lingered on Sarah for a moment longer than necessary. "Thank you all for coming," he began. "I know there's been a lot of speculation about why I'm here and what changes I might make. Let me put your minds at ease. I'm not here to shake things up just for the sake of it. I'm here because I care about this store and the people who work here. Sarah clenched her fists, her nails digging into her palms. She wanted to believe him, but something about his words felt off. That being said, Daniel continued, there are a few areas where we can improve, starting with management. Sarah's heart skipped a beat. All eyes turned to her, and she felt the weight of their stares. Sarah, Daniel said, his tone polite but firm, I'd like to meet with you after this to discuss some ideas. Is that okay? She nodded, her throat too tight to speak. The rest of the meeting passed in a blur. Daniel talked about customer service, efficiency, and teamwork, but Sarah barely heard a word. Her mind was racing, trying to figure out what he was planning. When the meeting ended, she followed Daniel to the office, her legs feeling like lead. He closed the door behind them and gestured for her to sit. Sarah, he said, leaning against the desk, I know this must be awkward for you. She forced a smile. It's fine, I'm just surprised, that's all. He nodded, his expression thoughtful. I get that, but I want you to know, I don't hold any grudges. What happened in the past is in the past. I'm here to move forward. Sarah relaxed slightly, but she still felt on edge. That's good to hear. That being said, he continued, I do have some concerns about how things have been run. I've noticed some inefficiencies, and I think we can do better. She stiffened. What kind of inefficiencies? He handed her a folder. I've put together a list. Take a look and let me know what you think. I'd like your input before we make any changes. Sarah opened the folder and skimmed the first page. Her stomach dropped. The list was long, and every item felt like a direct critique of her management. I'll review this, she said, her voice trembling slightly. Daniel smiled. Great. Let's meet again tomorrow to discuss. As she left the office, Sarah felt a mix of emotions, anger, fear, and a growing sense of determination. She wasn't going to let Daniel push her out without a fight. But deep down, she couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. Sarah spent the rest of the day poring over the folder Daniel had given her. Each page was filled with detailed notes, scheduling issues, inventory mismanagement, customer complaints. Some of the points were valid, but others felt nitpicky, even unfair. She couldn't help but wonder if this was his way of getting back at her. The next morning, she arrived at the store early, determined to be prepared for their meeting. She had spent hours the night before drafting responses to each of Daniel's points, ready to defend her decisions. But as she walked into the office, she found Daniel already there, sipping a cup of coffee and flipping through a stack of papers. Morning, Sarah, he said, looking up with a smile. Ready to get started? She nodded, setting her notes on the desk. I've gone through your list. Some of your concerns are valid, but others? Well, I think we might have different perspectives. Daniel leaned back in his chair, his expression calm. I'm open to hearing your thoughts. That's why I wanted to meet. Sarah took a deep breath and began going through her notes, explaining her reasoning for each decision. Daniel listened intently, nodding occasionally, but saying little. When she finished, there was a long silence. Finally, Daniel spoke. I appreciate your perspective, Sarah, but I think we need to make some changes, starting with the way we handle inventory. Sarah's heart sank. What kind of changes? He handed her another folder. I've drafted a new system. It's more efficient and should reduce errors. I'd like you to implement it starting next week. She flipped through the pages, her frustration growing. The system was complicated, and she wasn't sure it would work. But before she could argue, Daniel stood up. I know this is a lot to take in, he said, his tone softening. But I believe in this store, and I believe in you. I think we can make it better together. Sarah wanted to believe him, but his words felt hollow. She forced a smile. I'll do my best. As she left the office, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Daniel's calm demeanor, his sudden interest in the store, it all felt too calculated. She decided to do some digging. That evening after her shift, Sarah stayed late, going through old records and employee files. She wasn't sure what she was looking for, but she had a gut feeling there was more to Daniel's story. And then she found it. Tucked away in a folder marked miscellaneous was a letter from the store's previous owner. It was addressed to Daniel, dated just a few weeks before he was hired as a cashier. Sarah's hands trembled as she read the letter. It was a job offer, not for a cashier, but for a management position. Daniel had turned it down, saying he wanted to start from the bottom to understand the store better. Her mind raced. Daniel hadn't just stumbled into this store. He had planned it all along. But why? Sarah couldn't sleep that night. The letter played over and over in her mind, each word fueling her growing suspicion. Daniel hadn't just returned as her boss. He had orchestrated the entire situation. But what was his endgame? Revenge? Control? She needed answers. The next morning, she marched into the store, her determination outweighing her fear. Daniel was in the office as usual, reviewing paperwork. He looked up as she entered, his expression calm but curious. "Sarah," he said, setting down his pen, "what can I do for you?" She closed the door behind her and placed the letter on his desk. "I found this last night. Care to explain?" Daniel glanced at the letter, his face unreadable. For a moment, he said nothing. Then he leaned back in his chair and sighed. "I wondered if you'd find that." "So it's true," Sarah said, her voice trembling with anger. "You planned this from the beginning. You came here as a cashier just to—" "What? Spy on me? Take over the store?" Daniel shook his head. "It wasn't like that. I didn't come here to spy on you, Sarah. I came here to learn." "Learn what?" she snapped. "About the store," he said calmly. "About the people who work here, about you." Sarah's stomach churned. "Me? Why?" Daniel hesitated, his calm facade cracking for the first time. "Because I needed to understand why my father sold this place." Sarah froze. "Your father?" Daniel nodded. "The previous owner. He was my dad. He built this store from the ground up, but he never wanted me to be part of it. He said I didn't have what it takes. So when he decided to sell, I wanted to prove him wrong. I wanted to show him I could handle it, not just the business, but the people, the challenges, everything." Sarah stared at him, her anger giving way to confusion. "But why didn't you just tell me? Why all the secrecy?" "Because I needed to see it for myself," Daniel said, his voice tinged with regret. "I needed to know if this store was worth fighting for, and I needed to know if you were the right person to help me save it." Sarah sank into a chair, her mind reeling. "Save it? What are you talking about?" Daniel leaned forward, his expression earnest. "This store is struggling, Sarah. You know that. Sales are down, costs are up, and we're losing customers. My dad sold it because he didn't see a future here. But I do. And I think you do too." Sarah's chest tightened. She had known the store was struggling, but she hadn't realized how bad it was. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I need your help," Daniel said. "You know this store better than anyone. You care about it, about the staff, about the customers. I can't do this without you." Sarah looked at him, searching his face for any hint of deception, but all she saw was sincerity. For the first time since Daniel had returned, she felt a glimmer of hope. The days that followed were a whirlwind of change. Sarah and Daniel worked side by side, poring over financial reports, brainstorming ideas, and meeting with staff to address their concerns. It wasn't easy. There were disagreements, late nights, and moments of doubt. But for the first time in a long time, Sarah felt like she was part of something meaningful. One evening, as they were finalizing plans for a community event to attract new customers, Daniel turned to her. "You know, I wasn't sure about this at first. Coming back here, taking over the store, it felt like a huge risk. But now, I'm glad I did." Sarah smiled, feeling a sense of pride she hadn't felt in years. "Me too. I think we're onto something here." Daniel nodded, his expression thoughtful. "There's just one thing I need to ask you." "What's that?" He hesitated, then met her gaze. "Will you stay as my partner in this? I can't do it without you." Sarah's heart swelled. For so long she had felt like she was fighting a losing battle, trying to keep the store afloat on her own. But now, with Daniel by her side, she felt a renewed sense of purpose. "Yes," she said firmly, "I'll stay." Daniel smiled, a genuine, heartfelt smile that reached his eyes. "Thank you, Sarah. You have no idea how much that means to me." As they shook hands, sealing their partnership, Sarah felt a weight lift off her shoulders. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but for the first time, she believed they could succeed. And as she looked around the store, the shelves neatly stocked, the staff working together, the customers smiling as they shopped, she realized this wasn't just a job anymore. It was a family. Thank you for joining us on this emotional and suspenseful journey. We hope you enjoyed the twists, turns, and heartfelt moments of this story. If it touched your heart or kept you on the edge of your seat, we'd love to hear from you. Leave a comment below and let us know what you thought. Did you see the twists coming? Which part was your favorite? Hit the like button if you enjoyed the story. It means the world to us. Subscribe to stay updated on more gripping tales, heartfelt stories, and unexpected adventures. There's always more to come. Share this story with your friends and family. Spread the love and let them experience the journey too. Thank you for being part of our storytelling family. Your support inspires us to keep creating. Until next time, keep dreaming and believing in the power of a good story. Subscribe, like, comment, and share. Let's grow this community together.